There we go. Hi, everyone. Welcome to another edition of What's Up With That, Alex? My name is Simon Kent, and I'm a co-founder of Connect Family Law. And with me today is
Alex Boland, a practicing family lawyer, practicing, not perfect, but practicing.
in what part of the world?
Kelowna, BC.
Woo! How are things in Kelowna today?
Oh, they're wild.
Nice, nice. Well, listen, as most of the viewership know, this is an opportunity for me to ask Alex some pretty tough questions, family law related questions, and to see if we can shake out some answers from them. So today, my question has to do with cohab agreements. So I've got a buddy who is was living with a partner. They are coming up to their 2-year anniversary. And a funny thing is happening is that one of the partners is saying, look, either you sign a cohabitation agreement with me, or we're going to have to break up. So Alex, what's up with that? What is up with this 2-year mark? Why is one of them saying to the other, you either sign what's, I guess, essentially a prenup agreement, or we're going to break up?
It's a really good question. I mean, the central answer to it is that in British Columbia, unlike a lot of other provinces, unmarried people can have rights to property division by virtue of their relationship. So in most provinces, or many provinces, and until fairly recently in BC, people who were not married did not generally divide the property at the end of their relationship. There were some exceptions to that we'll touch on a bit later, but as a basic rule, married people split property and unmarried people didn't. Now, when we adopted the Family Law Act in the early 2010s, we changed that so that unmarried people were treated exactly the same as married people for the purposes of property division, with a couple of caveats. So the first is that for married people, you divide family property after you get married, right?
Right.
But it's not the case that as soon as you move in with somebody, you start dividing property. In BC, you have to live together in what's called a marriage-like relationship for at least 2 years before you have property, family property rights and obligations. So first, what is a marriage-like relationship? It's kind of a circular definition, right? But it basically means that you're not just living together, you're sharing important parts of your life. I mean, granted, you're probably intimate sexually, you're probably sharing expenses in some way, possibly merging your finances, you're presenting yourself as a couple to the outside world. There's a bunch of different factors that the court is looking at. But fundamentally, what it's trying to determine is whether you're living in that committed, long-term, lasting relationship. So if you get 2 years living together in that marriage-like relationship, then you get the property division. You're then entitled to divide property under the Family Law Act. And when you're looking at property, you're actually going back 2 years to the start of the date you started living in a marriage-like relationship for the purposes of determining what is and is not family property. So 2 years is a really important date because that's the date when those family property rights kick in. Now, can you do anything about it? And yeah, you can. You can break up like your friends, and then you don't have to worry about it. It's all good.
Right.
Or you could enter into what's called a cohabitation agreement. Cohabitation agreement is basically a written agreement that explains what the two of you want to have happen in the unfortunate event that you should separate. So how you're going to divide property, how you might choose to deal with spousal support. In other words, some kind of maintenance payment from one party to the other. You can do a lot of different things in these agreements. You can, to some extent, say, if we split up, we each keep our own, we go our separate ways. You could do, we can say after a couple of years, there's going to be a fixed payment. All of it is subject to the court's ultimate ability to say this agreement is unfair, right? The court can always say, great, you made this agreement, but it's totally one-sided, and I think it's garbage, and so the court can still either tinker with it or throw it out. But you are able to do this cohabitation agreement and to some extent control the consequences of the breakup.
Okay.
So what if so 2 questions I think come from that. Does a person who's not married have any rights at all before that 2-year mark crosses by? And they can. And this ties into that other issue that I mentioned earlier on about people who were unmarried but separated before the new legislation came into effect. So even if you can't qualify for property division under the Family Law Act, you can make a claim for what's called unjust enrichment and try and get some compensation that way. The difficulty there is to succeed in a claim for unjust enrichment, you have to be able to show that the other person got a benefit and you got some loss. And the classic examples are like there's a mom who's staying home with the children, and then there's the dad who's doing well in business. That can be kind of hard to show in a shorter 2-year relationship that's less than 2 years, especially if there's no children involved. So that kind of unjust enrichment argument is quite difficult in a short relationship. It may be possible, especially if maybe one spouse contributed an overwhelming amount of money to something and needs to be compensated for that. But it's difficult, very difficult. And then the other side of it is, what can you do to make sure your cohabitation agreement actually will withstand that kind of judicial examination? So the key things are making sure that both parties have rough equality in terms of their ability to negotiate it. So it's really important that both parties fully disclose their assets, debts, income, and expenses so that both parties know what they're getting into. It can be really important that both spouses have some independent legal advice, or at the very least access to independent legal advice, and to make sure that it's not a huge amount of pressure in the sense that maybe it's 1 day from the 2-year mark, and if the spouse who won't sign gets kicked out, they're going to be in a truly horrendous financial situation. The court might see that as being just too much, that their signature in that context was really coerced out of them. So the more you can do to make sure the circumstances around it are fair, the better. And then the other part of it is making sure that it is not completely one-sided, that there is some relationship to what the parties might get under the Family Law Act versus what's in the cohabitation agreement. Because if it's simply one-sided, the court may well say, this is just way too far off what the Family Law Act says, and I'm not going to uphold it. Mm-hmm. So quite a complicated area of law, but an interesting one, and one that sneaks up on a lot of people because sometimes those 2 years fly by.
Yeah, I'm sure they do. So it seemed to me that it's good advice to everybody who's considering getting into any kind of long-term relationship to consider a cohabitation agreement. I know because the work or our work at Connect demonstrates that upon the dissolution of a relationship, there's a lot of things to sort out, which can lead to a lot of conflict. So if you actually had a contract ahead of time, which had pre-thought about how you were going to deal with some of these issues and how they're going to be resolved, that can go a long way to making your separation and transition into divorce go a lot smoother. Am I right about that?
Totally. And when you think about it, when you move into somebody, that's a major financial decision, and the consequences that flow from it are very important. And most people wouldn't enter into a business relationship that's actually quite a lot less risky and quite a lot less financially all-encompassing without wanting to pay for it.
Yeah.
But people will simply enter into relationships for reasons of the heart, which is good, but it can have major repercussions. So yeah, most people, if they can sit down and think about it and talk it through, will probably be glad they did.
Yeah, and no one, I guess one of the reasons that people don't do that is like get into a cohab agreement is because no one likes to consider that their relationship is going to be one of those that doesn't make it, right? So who wants to talk about how the relationship's going to end when you're so in love and just starting out? So I get that, but I guess we do see, or the lawyers at Connect see, how badly things can go sometimes when these matters are in dispute, we'll call it, at the end of a relationship. Yeah.
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay, well, thanks a lot, Alex. I really appreciate your comments on that. That does sound quite complicated. So, but of course, if anyone has any questions about this, they can feel free to call anybody at Connect, and especially Alex, who seems to know what he's talking about.
Wait, so. Thanks for blowing up my voicemail, Simon. That's great.
Yeah, well, it's got a limit of 5 on it, doesn't it?
Yeah, right.
All right, well, thanks everybody for joining us today, and we look forward to seeing you again on another episode of What's Up With That, Alex. Talk to you soon. Bye.